Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar sponsored by the Employment Law Alliance. My name is Peter Waltz. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the ELA. For those not familiar with our organization, we are the world's largest network of labor and employment lawyers with members in more than 100 countries, all Canadian provinces and all 50 US states. Our members work together as a team to ensure that multinational companies receive consistent, seamless legal advice wherever their need arises. The ELA offers webinars like this one to provide practical information to our collective clients all around the world, and we welcome you today. We invite you to register on our website at ela.law. On the website, you can listen to on-demand webinars, register for upcoming events, or access the ELA's exclusive Global Employer Handbook. This valuable tool provides up-to-date legal and labor and employment information for each of our 172 jurisdictions around the globe. And now for a quick overview of the Zoom platform we're using today. For most of us, we're very familiar with Zoom, but we're going to go through a few things just to make sure you're familiar. The screens and navigation tools are very similar, but let's review a few things so you're aware. Today's program is a listen-only mode program. So in order to communicate with our panelists, which is highly encouraged, please use the Q&A feature that can be accessed from the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. To ask a question, it's very simple. Just type in your answer into the Q&A icon. Just click on that. It'll bring up a Q&A window, then type your content and press send. Now, if you have a question for a specific speaker, please type the first name of the speaker followed by your question. That way our moderator can direct it to the appropriate person. And we have a good sized audience today, so we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can live on the program, but we encourage you to reach out to any of our members by using their contact information on the webpage. A copy of today's slide deck, a certificate of attendance, and all other reference materials are available in the resources section. That's on the landing page of the website where you registered. Picture of it is on your screen. A link to this was in your registration email. We'll also provide another link to it in the chat box during the presentation, so feel free to access that at any time. To get the best bandwidth, please consider closing any unnecessary programs or browser tabs to conserve your bandwidth. If anything does fall behind, simply refresh your screen. On a PC, press F5. If you're on a Mac, press Command and the R key. For additional information, you can always submit a question in the Q&A topic regarding any difficulties you're having. Just type technical difficulties. Our webinar team can assist you. The session is being recorded. We will have an on-demand version as well that you can share with other colleagues. That'll be sent to all participants within a few days. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our discussion, who will introduce the panelists and start the program.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. I'm Mohamed El-Khouir, Managing Partner at CWA in Morocco. We are looking forward to have a great discussion with you today. If you allow me, I will start by introducing our panelist of speakers today for this today's webinar. We have today with us Noah Partuk from the Ministry of Economy and Trade in Israel, that is in charge of Middle East and Africa. We also have our colleague Nina Brodermanor, who is a partner at the law firm Nashitz, Brandes, Amir & Co. in Israel. We will also be glad to have with us this afternoon Ilan Winder, who is also a partner at Nashitz, Brandes, Amir & Co., always in Israel. And last but not least, Sharon Sfoni, who is the head of the Gulf desk at Nashitz, Brandes, Amir & Co. in Israel. So we have quite interesting and very insightful people today with us. And having this speaker now presented, let's get started and have a look on the overview and the goals of today's presentation. Our aim and goal, our purpose today in this discussion with you would be really to remove roadblocks and open up business relationship with Israel. As you have all heard, there is a recent international agreement and a new climate towards Israel in the Middle East and in North Africa, and especially in Morocco. So this generates a lot of opportunities in Israel. There is a lot of strong sectors. There is various initiatives that are initiated by the Ministry of Economy and Trade to promote business between Israel and Morocco. We will also try to give you some input and valuable information on how to open a business in Israel, how to deal with the Israeli culture. And also, as we are the ELA and as we are focused on employment law, we'll obviously give you a quick presentation on employment law in Israel and how to get people to work in Israel. So that's pretty much our program this afternoon. We'll try to give you the maximum information we can, and we are very good people to do that. And the first of them that I would like to welcome for his presentation and the greeting word is Sharon Sfoni, the head of the Gulf desk at Nashid's, Brandes, Amir & Co. I got it. I leave it to you, Sharon, and thanks a lot for being with us today.
Shukran, Muhammad. Thank you very much, Muhammad. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Before I start greeting in English, I will say a small greeting in Arabic for our audience, Arabic speaker audience. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. اسمي شارون سفوني وأنا رئيس مكتب الخليج والمغرب بشركة المحامين ناشد براندس أمير من إسرائيل. معي زميلتي بنينا برودر وزميلي إيلان ويندر، ونتمنى لكل المشاهدين الكرام بهذا الويبينار توفيق، نجاح وفرصة سعيدة. So basically I greeted our Arabic speaking audience for joining us to this webinar, and I wish all much success, and I hope it will be useful for you for this program that we actually prepared for you together with Ilan and Pnina to get you introduction for the first steps of doing business in Israel. Basically, as you know, in the recent years since the Abraham Accord, and we are 1 year into the Abraham Accord that was signed initially in September 19 between UAE, Bahrain, Israel, with the support of the American leadership at that time. We actually established for the first time the connection with those Gulf states. And not far from that, around December, we were very happy to see that Morocco joined these agreements. And Morocco is not actually a new country for the Israelis. There is a big history because involved the Israeli Moroccan Jews and the Moroccan Jews that lived for many decades in Morocco and were prosperous over there, and protected by the kings of in Morocco for the many decades ago. And as today, as we speak, the biggest community, the Jewish community in Arabic states, it's in Morocco, and it's involved 4,000 people. These ties and this connection with the Moroccans that immigrate to Israel and the one that stayed still make the Israeli-Moroccan connection very strong, and culturally and even business-wise, it's very easy to do the business. There we have quite a lot of Moroccan-speaking Israelis and Jews in Israel. So in this kind of communication, we are very familiar with the Israelis are very familiar with the Moroccan culture, and it's actually helping to do business in the right way. I would say that since the Abraham Accords erupted, we see the influence not only around these three countries that I mentioned, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. We see a big spread of initiatives in the Middle East, events with Egypt and Jordan and other countries that are coming more closer to Israel now. For instance, for the last 40 years, Egypt was avoiding sending Egypt airplanes to Israel and used white-tail, non-branded Air Sinai flights to Israel. Last week, we were announced that Egypt Air is flying into Tel Aviv 4 weekly flights per week. And with Jordan, it was announced yesterday that there is a new water agreement from Israel to Jordan after a long time. So we believe this, as a whole, the Abraham Accords will contribute a lot to bringing closer much more countries to get involved with normalization accords and treaties with Israel. And we see the Middle East getting a new shape. And all these opportunities from Israel to the Arabic world that getting much more wider and accelerated are actually will and eventually will come to a wider business in the business perspective for companies, entities, individuals to do business with Israel from the Arabic countries and from Israel to those countries. I just would like to mention that in January 2021, Israel reopened, I would say, the Israeli mission. We have Ambassador David Govrin over there, very experienced Arabist that is stationed in actually Rabat. And I would say the emphasis for the relation between Israel and Morocco will be eventually on the fields of agriculture, water tech, tourism, cyber, and even HLS, digital healthcare, and smart cities. I would like to mention that Morocco entered this year to the free trade zone in Africa agreement, and it opens a variety of opportunities. So as a whole, if I can summarize this, I think that the future is bright, and we'll see more and more companies and entities doing business from Morocco and other parts of the Arabic world in Israel, and inshallah many more to follow and to come. And we are here in National Brand Samir to help those that would like to explore and to actually start doing this business to make it easier on you. And I believe my partner, Pninan Broder and Ilan Winder, will actually follow the steps how to establish a business here in Israel. So in any question you might have, please drop us an email, and we'd be delighted to help you in the first steps here in Israel.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. Your Arabic is quite impressive, actually. So we can also go to Israel to learn Arabic then. Not necessarily need to go to Morocco or in any other place. Can I ask you if you have some, I would say, insight on really next concrete steps that are taking place between Morocco and Israel? Is there some specific events, some structuration organizations that is going to take place, or some of your clients that have already mentioned a significant interest on Morocco?
Yeah, so first birds, the early birds that actually doing the relation between Israel and Morocco actually was the tourism and the airlines that are flying back and forth. You can jump on a plane in Tel Aviv, and after five and a half hours, you can find yourself in Casablanca or in Marrakesh. Me, myself, I'm going to visit next month in Morocco for a tour with my family. So I think many Israeli tourists will follow. This will be the early bird. But nevertheless, companies are getting very much interested in the Israeli agriculture and water tech solution. And of course, in this field, I think it will be the first initiative we can see taking place. The potential, the economical potential is huge. We're talking about 250 million a year. Just to let you know that today we're standing about 10 million. So there is a lot of room to grow. And with all this wide and deep cultural connection that the countries have, the economy and the cooperation will be very easy and very good.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. It's really interesting, and I think we are all excited about what's going on and what's happening between our two countries. And I know that there is a very strong initiative from the private sector, but I also have noticed that the public sector, the governmental bodies, and the administration are really supporting this approach, whether in Morocco, we have seen it last week, or in Israel, and that's what we are going to see now, because we'll now move on and discuss with Noah Partuk from the Ministry of Economy and Industry of Israel, who is going to present us the different opportunities in Israel, the different sectors where there is opportunities of investment, and also what is done by the ministry to make it easier to do business in Israel. Noah, I leave it to you.
Shukran, Muhammad, and thank you very much. I'm very happy to be in this conversation today. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Noah. I'm managing the Middle East and Africa operations at the Ministry of Economy and Industry. Our ministry is operating 45 offices around the world, where our commercial attaches are helping straighten the connections, the trade connections between Israel and the countries that they are based in. Our role is to help the Israeli industry work around the world and create business connections with our peers and partners. In the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce the Israeli industry in a nutshell, talk about the Israeli-Morocco ongoing process on the government level, discuss the trade by sectors, what we look at today, what we're looking at in the future, and what's the trade potential, and introduce a few partners that are semi-governmental partners that we work with that each of you is welcome to use. Moving on, the Israeli industry is very diverse and is considered a strong economy. We have been developed from a developing country in the past 70 years to a country that is called a startup nation. We have a lot of MNCs operating in Israel, more than 300. Moving on to discussing the diversity of the Israeli industry. As I mentioned before, the MNCs, international MNCs that are operating in Israel, chosen to establish their R&D centers here. There's a lot of Israelis that are helping international companies develop. So if we would like to discuss the diversity of the sectors that we are strong at, we can move on to see how we have developed from a country that is based mostly on agriculture and water to a country that is excelling in a lot of different sectors. You could tell in the past year, in 2020, there were a lot of investment in the main sectors such as IT and data, fintech, smart mobility, life science, industrial technology, retail and marketing, agri-food and agri-tech, water and security technologies. But the more we advance, the more we can see the diversity of the Israeli industry. And there's a lot of new sectors that are really blooming in Israel, such as the IoT, artificial intelligence, big data, health, retail tech, infrastructure, and even sport tech. So Israelis are really trying to develop themselves, and they're really excelling in a lot of different fields. I would like to move on to discuss Morocco and Israel. As we joined the Abraham Accords, it was a very, very exciting moment for all of us at the industry level and at the government level. We see a lot of potential between the different countries. So there's a few moves that the government is doing to promote the trade. We see our role as the leaders of the infrastructure. As the industry is always moving faster than the government, we are the only ones who can establish a good infrastructure for the industries to operate together and remove regulatory block barriers. So we established an agreement between the two ministries, which is hopefully will be signed in the next month. It's an economic and trade agreement that is specifying the will and the readiness of the two countries to work together and operate together. And we are really aiming to create a channel for the two industries, the Moroccan industry and the Israeli industry, to work together easily and freely. And that's the main idea of the agreement. And our minister have already spoken with His Excellency Mulay Hafiz El Alami, and hopefully they will have a chance to meet very soon. So we're excited for that. And we are working in governmental work groups together, ourselves and the Ministry of Trade in Morocco, really identify the sectors that are most potentially for us to work together and understand the needs of each other and the interests of each other. And that's a really interesting conversation. It's an ongoing conversation where both of us are putting real goals on the calendar, including mutual business visits, mutual seminars, and events to expose the Israeli industry to the Moroccan industry and the Moroccan industry to the Israeli one. And of course, there is an agreement about direct flights, which started in July 2021. Currently, in terms of in terms of the trade volume, we're standing on 69 million, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics. And moving on to the future, we really want to see how we grow. Currently, the main sectors that are we operate. If I just go back quickly to the current situation between the two countries, then you can see that we are mostly trading on chemicals and chemical products, electrical machinery, food and agriculture, transportation products, medical and rubber and plastic. But as I mentioned before, Israeli industry is very diverse, and the Moroccan industry has so much to offer to Israel as well. So moving on to the future, we see a lot of potential in diversifying and growing the trade between the two countries. Some of the sectors that we have identified include health and medical equipment, water, agrotechnology, digital finance and tech, automotive, textile, aerospace, and agri-food. And of course, I'm sure there is much more, but these are the main sectors that we will mostly focus on in 2022, establishing events around these sectors and really hoping to connect the two industries to each other. Finalizing with a real note of positivity that we see these numbers growing because on our side, the Israeli industry is very, very excited for this relationship, is willing to invest time and resources to really get to know their peers, their partners, and straighten the business relations. And we are there to support them, support the efforts, and connect them to different partners. And if I can discuss just quickly the different partners that are on the Israeli side, and that are working with the government and presenting the industry, representing the industry. And these are great sources of information for anyone who is interested to learn more about the different companies and what it has to offer. Israeli Export Institute is an operating arm of the Ministry of Economy, and Manufacturers Association, Federation of Israeli Chamber of Commerce. Startup Nation Central, it's a great source of information to just get to know different sectors, different companies. And of course, there's the Israeli Morocco Chamber of Commerce, the official Chamber of Commerce of Israel Morocco. And these are the partners that we also work with to connect on the other side, on the Moroccan side, our partners in the Moroccan side, to get to know the Moroccan industry. So to finalize, I think this is an amazing point to be in time where there's a lot of potential ahead of us. And we are really looking forward to see and help the Israeli industry and really get to know the Moroccan industry. And I think on a personal note, it's very, very exciting for me to be part of this process especially where my grandfather and my grandmother both grew up in Morocco, in Marrakesh, and in Casablanca. And I personally am very looking forward to visit Morocco, this beautiful and unique country. So thank you very much, and it was lovely to speak with you today.
Thanks a lot, Noah, for that very insightful review. It's very complete, actually, and you did present us all the various aspects. And on top, we are glad to know that you are also Moroccan then, and that you can come to your home whenever you want. Thanks a lot, Noah. And we are now moving on and having looked to some more technical and practical aspects with Pnina Broder-Manor, a lawyer at Nashitz Brand Samir & Co. that will give us an overview and more concrete responses on legal aspects for investing in Israel and all the related topics one or an investor may have in willing to do business in Israel. Pnina, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I wanted to start with the general information about Israel. Israel became an independent state in 1948. And at the time, there were only 870,000 inhabitants. Today, the population is approximately 9.3 million. So it's a large growth. Close to 3/4 of the population are Jews. Approximately 21% are Arabs, which would include Muslim, Christian, and Druze Arabs, and around 5% are of other origins. The country is small, so it's 22,000 square kilometers. So that's about 5% of the size of Morocco. And usually people are surprised by the fact that Israel, of the size and the size of the population, because I think Israelis travel a lot and have a lot of international connections, and a lot of people have met someone from Israel. So they're surprised that such a small country makes so much, noise in the world or so much of an effect. Anyways, Israel's capital is Jerusalem, but Tel Aviv is the economic and technological center. Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. So it's a liberal democracy. It has a parliamentary system with proportional representation. The Knesset is our parliament, it's the legislature. The executive powers are vested in the government that's headed by the prime minister. And there is a president, but he holds a mainly ceremonial role. As you've heard from Noah, our economy is stable, is strong. And the GDP is rising from year to year. The technology industry has been the driving force of Israel's economy in the past, quite a few decades, maybe 3 decades. And Israel is among the leading countries in the number of NASDAQ-listed companies. Our legal system combines 3 legal traditions. One is English common law, also civil law and Jewish law. It's based on the principle of precedence, and it's an adversarial system, meaning the parties in civil cases bring evidence before the court. Court cases are decided by professional judges. There are no juries in Israel. The OECD's Better Life Index ranks countries on different aspects of life. And Israel ranks highly on certain of those categories. One would be the percentage of citizens holding a higher education degree. So 87.4% of the adults between the ages of 25 and 64 have completed upper secondary education. Also high, well, quite high on jobs and earnings. So in terms of employment, 69% of the Israelis between the ages of 15 and 64 have a paid job. 73% of the men of that age are in paid work, compared with only 66% of women. So there's a little bit of an inequality there. And in Israel, 15% of employees work very long hours. And that there you can see actually the difference between men and women, because 23% of men work very long hours, but only 7% of women work very long hours. So I'm saying to you men, you should learn from the women and get a balanced lifestyle, right? Now, on the issue of personal safety, 70% of people say that they feel safe walking alone at night in Israel. We're also high on the life expectancy. In terms of health, the life expectancy at birth in Israel is 83 years. That's 3 years higher than the OECD average. For women, it is 84 years and 81 years for men. And finally, I'll say that Israel ranks high on the happiness criteria, and that is if people think that, or if people feel that they are happy. And in general, Israelis are more satisfied with their lives than the OECD average. And when they're asked to rate their general satisfaction with life on a scale from 0 to 10, Israelis marked 7.2 on that scale. So as you can see, all in all, Israelis are generally happy and enjoy a good quality of life.
Thanks a lot, Nina. Yeah, sorry, Nina, but one question come to my mind listening to you on that general information. Can we manage do something in Israel, specifically business, if we don't know Hebrew at all, and that we don't have I know that all of you guys speak different languages, but for someone that comes in Israel and cannot speak the language, is it possible really to do business and to develop its own activity?
So yes, I'll say, Hebrew is the most spoken language and the formal language, but Arabic has a special status in the country. And for instance, road signs would be in Hebrew, Arabic, and in English. Almost everyone speaks English. It's very easy to get around with English. And other common languages are French, Russian, and Amharic. Okay, I'm moving on. So to start a business in Israel, an international business can operate either by registering the foreign company with the Israeli Register of Companies or by incorporating an Israeli company. The process of incorporating an Israeli company is quite simple. I mean, there are other forms of organization as well, but the companies are probably the most common, more than partnerships or other kinds of organizations. So basically, incorporating a company is easy and quite simple. You need to collect certain documents to identify the foreign shareholders and the directors. And then some documents have to be prepared, signed, and certified by an attorney. In our experience, the collecting of the documents, identifying the shareholders and directors takes the most time. They have to be notarized and apostilled. But when all the documents are ready, the process of actually registering the company with the registrar is very, very quick. There is no requirement to have Israeli shareholders or nominal capital requirements, and the registration fee is also not high. There's also an annual payment to the registrar of companies, but it's not very high. Most companies limit the personal liability of the owners, usually in the form of shares. So then you would see the word limited or abbreviation LTD at the end of the name of the company. And that's how you can recognize that it's a limited shared company in Israel. In order to start the business operations, the company has to register with the tax authority and with the National Insurance Institute for Social Security, and also with the VAT, the Value Added Tax Authority. And the VAT authority would usually ask for a bank account for VAT refund purposes. There's no fees to open a bank account with a commercial bank, but bank commissions and bank account features vary from one to the other. So it's a good idea to shop around before you decide on a bank and exactly what type of an account you want. These days, with all the anti-money laundering requirements, the process of opening a bank account is not as easy as it used to be. It's not difficult, but it takes some time and some doing with the bank. Depending on the type of the business, a business license may be required. And generally speaking, it's required from industrial businesses, maybe businesses involving food, groceries, restaurants. Generally speaking, regular offices don't usually need a business license. Israeli companies have to appoint a certified accountant to audit their annual financial reports. Private companies have to file a report with the company's register every year, and as I said, pay the fee. Israeli companies law states that private companies have to report their accounting records by acceptable reporting standards. And this term isn't defined in the law. So private companies can either use the IFRS as their accounting standards or Israeli accounting standards published by the Israeli Accounting Standards Board. And private companies that are owned mostly by foreign citizens can also apply to use other accounting reporting standards like, for instance, US GAAP. But once a method of accounting is chosen, the company has to be consistent and continue with that method. Yes.
Thanks, Nina. One question, if I may. In your opinion, why do foreign businesses open operations in Israel? What is the main reason?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. Noah Paltuf that spoke before me actually probably touched on most of them. I think, one reason is the strong economy and the unemployment rate that is low, maybe a little bit higher now because of COVID this year, but generally it's very low. Israel has a talented and educated workforce. It has a high concentration of engineers and PhDs, and a strong high-tech sector, leaders in the field of internet, cybersecurity, water technology, the fields mentioned by Noah. And I'll say also because maybe business can be conducted mostly in English, and there's a good connection with other economies. So I think, those would be the reasons. Moving on. I just wanted to, talk a little bit about cultural features of Israeli society, the way that I see it. I'm sure different people may have different takes on this. So I think it's fair to say that Israeli society is a relationship-oriented culture, not so much a rule-oriented culture. So feelings and emotions are primary, and there is very little formality. We address each other by first name. Our dress code is very informal. Punctuality is relaxed, which means that, it's not that unusual for someone to be 10 to 15 minutes late for a meeting. And that can be challenging sometimes with your schedule. We are very expressive. Okay, we speak passionately and quickly and may raise our voices as part of normal communication. So, depending on the culture that foreigners come from, they sometimes hear Israelis speak among each other and think that they're arguing or that they're angry, but really it's just that the talk is quite animated. Israelis often interrupt someone else when they're speaking. So if we have a comment to make, we may not wait until there's a pause in the conversation. In other cultures, it's considered very rude, but for us, it's just hard for us not to jump in when we
don't do that, Nina. We never do that.
Thanks, Ilan. Exactly. So we consider ourselves as being very direct. And everyone in Israel has an opinion about most everything. No one keeps it to themselves. You can expect to get advice if you've asked for it or not. And there's no intent to insult. It's just that, some of the comments, even if they seem a bit direct, it's just, people just say what they think and they're engaged. So they weigh in. You should be prepared for tough but friendly negotiations because we love to negotiate. And if you have a counter offer from your party that you're negotiating with that seems to be, way off to you, don't be offended because it's not the intent. We think, it's legitimate for us to sort of discuss until we reach the meeting point. So if all of that sounded a little bit negative, it was not meant to be negative at all, because in Israeli style, I was just trying to be, direct and honest and tell you the things the way I see them. Israel is a very lively and vibrant and intense society, and Israelis are result-driven. And in achieving goals, they'll be resourceful, flexible, creative, a lot of thinking outside the box. So, we hope to meet you here soon and get to discuss with you in that way.
We'll try to experience that soon, Pnina. But you say Israelis are open and direct. Then I would ask: is there anything we shouldn't discuss with Israelis?
Well, to be on the safe side, I would say I would stay away from controversial political issues, because Israelis argue very passionately with each other on these issues, but would not take well to something that sounds like criticism from non-Israelis. Doesn't go well. So that's, unless you know someone that you're talking to very well, stay clear of that, I think.
Yeah. No, thanks. It's quite clear, and I think very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Pnina. It was very interesting to have all these different topics, and I think all the audience and myself are just ready to jump on a plane and start business in Israel. And if we want to do that, we will need obviously Ilan Winder to help us and to see how we can deal with the employment issues and employment topics. We are the ELA. We cannot spend more than 1 hour not going back to employment question and employment queries. So Ilan, if I may, we will need your support on all the employment side and employment questions we may have.
Well, thanks, Muhammad. As you said, last but not least, this is an ELA webinar, so employment law comes into mind, right? So we'll try to give you a glimpse, a short list of the legal infrastructure and rules regarding employment and labor law in Israel. Obviously, that's only tipping points and talking points. After that, anytime we are here for you, for your colleagues, for your clients, for any legal services in that respect. We think we all understand that understanding a little bit of the employment infrastructure and laws and rules in the new place of business is very important. Each business needs its employees, and it needs to know how to work with them, so to speak. So labor law in Israel is regulated on a few, let's say, layers or sources. That it has a few sources of regulation. The first one, obviously, is Parliament acts, laws, legislation, which set the minimum rights of employees. Some would say mostly the rights of employees and the duties of employers, but that's how it is. We will go through some of the main legislation in a minute. And any other sources like agreements, collective agreements, and so on can only add to the employees' rights and cannot derogate any of their rights set by legislation. So in certain industries, and that's important to know and check ahead when you start a business in Israel, some industries are very, the unions are very strong in, the collective agreements set the tone for the employees' rights and the relations with the employer. Collective agreements cover employment terms, but also procedures for termination, discipline actions, and so on. And if the labor minister likes any of the collective agreements, he can publish an extension order, basically making the orders of the collective agreement relevant and valid and enforceable for any employer and employee. It's a nice trick, I guess, because first of all, it makes it very easy for parliament or government to enact rules, because they don't have to think, they don't have to draft, they don't have to discuss, they don't have to write it down, they don't have to think about it, they don't have to vote about it. The union and the employers already did that for them, and all it needs to do is publish an extension order. So it's a cool trick. But more important, it can reflect more correctly, let's say, the balance between employers and employees, because it was achieved by negotiations and not, legislation coming from above. So it is considered a better way for labor relations and so on. The last layer or source of rights and duties is the personal agreement. Many times covering, more complicated benefits, bonus plans, options, and so on. The freedom of contract in employment agreements is very limited because of the sources I mentioned before, the laws and the extension orders and the mandatory rights and duties. So if you want to employ somebody, you have to recruit him first. So we'll touch on recruitment a little bit. Recruitment of employees is regulated in several aspects. The first one, the technical or the procedural aspect of it, is that requires kind of transparency. You have to let the candidate know how the process is progressing, if he's accepted for the job or not. He has to be notified in writing, so he knows what's going on and can follow and can act upon his rights. And from the material aspect, a very strong legislation regarding discrimination in recruitment is in force. Discrimination based on race, sex, religion, faith, and some other irrelevant topics is forbidden and can be regarded as a criminal offense or a civil cause of action. In Israel, criminal checks are forbidden. This a lot of clients from other jurisdictions find strange, but kind of comes from the idea that even if a person did commit some kind of an offense, paid his duty, that did his time, whatever, he should be able to start fresh and not have a potential employer thinking, I don't want to employ him because of his past misdemeanors or whatever. Also, health checks and drug checks and alcohol checks are considered to be very limited to very specific positions that those checks are very relevant for them. This comes, of course, from the privacy rights of candidates and employees regarding their physical, medical, and private life as a general rule. To cover some of the basic rights of employees, I'll mention a few of them. One is minimum wages, which is currently at approximately $9 per hour and $1,600 per month. You cannot pay under that. Salaries are to be paid on time, not later than the 9th of the month for the previous working month. Hours of work and rest there's a limitation on the number of hours of work for a day and for a week. The full time is considered 8.5 hours per day, 42 hours per week. As Nina mentioned, many employees in Israel work overtime. It is allowed until a certain limitation. And there's, of course, a special compensation for working overtime. Weekly rests and public holidays goes along the lines of the Jewish day of rest in the week, which is Saturday for Jews. Other religions can choose other days, but basically it goes along these lines. It's forbidden to employ somebody during the weekly rest, unless you have a special permit, which is not easy to get. Each employee is entitled to a vacation, hopefully spending it in Morocco sometime, with a minimum number of days depending on seniority. And the idea is, of course, to have a time of rest for the employee to be with his family or to do whatever he likes to refresh himself, to rest. And so it is mandatory that at least 7 consecutive days each year of vacation each employee will receive. Sick leave, of course, employees they accrue sick leave days during their work, like a day and a half for each month of work, and they can use them for whenever they are sick. Payment starts at the second day, but after that, from the fourth day, you're supposed to cover the regular salary of the employee. It is mandatory to have a pension scheme for each employee after a few months of employment. Such a scheme has a minimum percentage of payments, and it should cover pension payments for retirement, but also death and injury, and also severance pay for termination of employment. Speaking of which, termination of employment is possible in Israel. It is done, but it has become quite a process in the last quite a few years. In many cases, we find ourselves going through the motions because actually when you start a termination process, you already have a decision in mind, but the mandatory process is that each employee is entitled to a hearing before a decision is taken, before a termination. So an employer needs to submit an invitation for the hearing, explaining what are the reasons for the consideration of termination. If it's not done accordingly, and the chance of a hearing is not given to the employee, it's considered an unlawful termination. And the courts may and do award compensation accordingly. A hearing is typically a face-to-face meeting where you hear the employee what he has to say about the reasons, if he has explanations, if he has a special personal problem to share with the employer that may affect the decision, and so on. Of course, in Corona time, we did many of the hearings video conference or even by the phone. So after you heard the employee, you need to consider what he had to say and then take the decision and notify him of the decision. And assuming you decided to terminate his employment despite what he had to say, you need to give him a prior notice, either actually in work time or as a compensation. The length of it depends on the seniority, from 1 day to 1 month minimum according to the law. And then you have to pay the severance pay, which is calculated at 1 month's salary multiplied by the number of years of employment. Of course, if you have a pension scheme set, then you minus the severance pay accrued at the pension scheme. Just a quick word on employing foreigners. It is possible. It, of course, requires special permits, and each kind of foreign employee has like special procedures. Most work migrants we find in Israel are working, on the agriculture, on the care for the elderly, which are typically areas where manpower is required. There's a shortage of employees. But for multinational or foreign businesses, there's a procedure for employing or having foreign experts working in Israel. We find that our global and foreign clients need the service quite often, and we do that regularly. Just to wrap it up, a few words about the labor courts. The labor courts in Israel, the labor issues and disputes in Israel are ruled in a different and separate and independent system of courts. They are very, very accessible for employees. The fees are cheap. They're open for claims. Some argue that the labor courts are pro-employees, but we find them usually very fair. They are clean, no corruption, and so on. So even if you're an employer defending a case in labor court, you are fine. The courts are very active in the rulings, including setting law by precedent. For example, the procedure I talked about of termination of a hearing and so on, this is a rule made by the courts or by the labor courts. You will not find it in the books, only in the rulings of the courts, the labor courts. So to sum it up, labor in Israel is highly regulated and in constant development. So that's what we're here for. We'll be happy to consult, to help, to assist you, your colleagues, your clients in any aspect of labor law in Israel.
Thanks a lot, Ilan. It was very complete and instructive, as always, with you. I think it gives us a very clear picture. My pleasure. It gives us a very clear picture on employment law in Israel. One question I have would be if you can tell us more about, let's say, the possibility for a potential investor that is willing to do business in Israel, but not yet sure to set up a company. Would it be possible for him to hire, let's say, an employee that would be some marketing, commercial prospection to see if really it's a place for him to set up? So in another word, would it be possible to hire through third parties when you don't have a legal presence in Israel?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a very common practice for a business starting or checking the ground, so to speak, to make a decision whether to grow or even to start a business, to use third parties, independent contractor companies like Manpower and such, to employ those employers instead of directly employing them with all the procedures involved, without the registration and the taxation registration and so on. We work regularly with such agencies and see the solutions they can offer foreign businesses. So for anyone listening, that should not be a worry, because Israel is very, there's a lot of companies like that. They give services, they are there, they are available and so on. So that's really an option.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot. And if we don't have to worry about that aspect, do we have to worry about the cost of employment in Israel? Is it expensive to have an employee?
Well, cost of employment is always a worry, right? But, you know, on top of, I mean, not on top, but added to the basic salary, one should calculate, you know, depending on the industry and so on, something between 35 and 40% on top of the salary to cover the pension, to cover the holiday day, vacation days, sick days, whatever. So that should be, you know, a general number to take into account. For each industry, you'll have to check whether there are special rights that take it even more expensive. But that should be the general number of thinking.
Oh, thanks a lot, Ilan. It's quite clear, I think, on that. We don't have that much time left. There is a few questions for the audience, but we'll respond separately. There is some people asking on the CFC organization, so I think CFC will liaise with them and get to response. And same for the banking sector in Israel and the financial center and financial services. It would need some time to respond, so we will not be able to address that question. There is one question I would like actually Pnina to address, and that is always a source of interest for us in the ELA. Do you have, Pnina, in Israel, some restriction on access to the workplace? Can an employer makes it conditional for an employee to access the workplace, and the condition would be to be vaccinated or to have a negative test or to have a recovery certificate? Is there something like that in Israel, or can we just access and there is no restriction applicable in the country or in the companies?
So that's a very hot topic in Israel in these days. And there isn't really a clear answer to the question, because as COVID has been progressing, we have had some case law that the government didn't really regulate this completely specifically from the beginning. And there is case law that says that businesses where the employees have close contacts with others, like for instance, kindergarten staff or cashiers in supermarkets where the job cannot be done remotely, were allowed to make this kind of a requirement from their employees. But what happened after that is, first of all, it's not clear about the general businesses that don't, or jobs that could be done remotely, or people that don't actually have a lot of contact with others, if it's a legitimate requirement. And recently the government passed legislation that regulates these issues for certain businesses, also businesses that have a lot of contact with the public. So for those businesses, definitely the government said, yes, not only can you require it, but you have to require it. But for other businesses, it's not really completely, clear. So, you have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. In every case, weigh the employees' privacy rights and autonomy rights against the business's rights and the rights of the other stakeholders to their health and privacy. Having said that, a lot of employers have decided to adopt this kind of a policy because maybe they would rather take the legal risk than actually take the health risk and the risk on their operations. But it's really, it's analyzed on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks a lot, Nina. And I would like to say also a huge thanks to all our presenters today, Noah, Nina, Ilan, Sharon. Thanks a lot for this very insightful review. And now I'll give the floor back to Peter to give you some final words and to close our discussions.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. And to our moderator and panelists for today, we loved having you today. I'd also like to thank CFC, Casablanca Financial City, who's also sponsoring this event and provided an excellent overview on accessing the African continent through Morocco and their services. If you didn't get to listen or see that program, it is on demand on the ELA website. To our audience, of course, on behalf of the ELA, we're so happy that you joined us as well. If you'd like further information on the topics today, remember, go back to the website page. You can access all of our speakers there, their email address, their bios, access to their firm's webpage. They'd all be happy to hear from you. So access their contact information and bios on that page, along with all the resources for today's program. If you enjoyed this program, you want to subscribe to other ELA programs. We have one coming up next week, the National Labor Relations Board, Getting the Inside Track. So those looking at what's going on in labor in the U.S., this will be a great opportunity to meet with one of the board members of that government body. A link to this webinar will be provided in the chat box during this podcast. For those that want to know more about the ELA and listen to timely updates from our global team of experts, I really encourage you to check out our podcast. It's called Employment Matters. It's now one of the top-rated legal and HR podcasts. You can find it in the Apple Podcast Store, Google Play, Spotify, or your favorite resource. This week, we celebrated 200 episodes on our podcast. They're all there for your listening pleasure. For those that are seeking any educational credits for today, a certificate of attendance and supporting materials are available in the event landing page. If you want to listen to this webinar again, we will be sending out a link. But if you want to listen to this one or any past webinars, including the one from CFC, please visit our website at ela.law. If you have any questions regarding this or any other upcoming webinars or need additional information, please reach out to us at webinars@ela.law. Lastly, follow us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at ELA Global or on LinkedIn under the Employment Law Alliance. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for your participation. Be safe and well.